Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm with Tom Mortimor with Le Cadeau Winery in Willamette Valley. Now, Tom, before you roll your eyes at me, I'm going to let you do it. We are in Oregon. We are in Willamette Valley, but you have chosen a French name, so tell us a little bit about it and correct my French pronunciation.
Well, I'm probably not the best person to correct your French because I don't speak very good French myself, but the name of the winery is Le Cadeau. We're sitting in our tasting room in Dundee, Oregon. Our vineyard is actually located on the south slope of Parrot Mountain in Newberg, Oregon.
So tell me about the property. When did you purchase it, and how many acres do you have planted? What are you growing there?
Well, 23 years ago, I fell in love with Oregon. I was actually living in Minneapolis at the time. My wife and I came out here, and I thought it was about the most beautiful place on the planet. And somewhere along the way, I got this crazy idea that I should buy a piece of dirt. And I figured that if I was going to buy dirt, of course, it had to have a view. So we were looking at hillside dirt, and I thought, well, let's buy grape dirt. And I told my wife that we were just going to buy this property and we were going to sit on it for a while, and I didn't really know what we were going to do with it. And she got very suspicious when about 3 weeks after we closed, soil maps and nursery catalogs started showing up in the mailbox. And she accused me of being very disingenuous. I really didn't mean to be, but when you buy grape dirt, I learned that it talks to you. And it says, plant me. And so I was just being obedient.
Uh-huh. And the total acreage?
The total parcel is 28 acres. We started out and we cleared about 10 acres and we made a huge mess. And I thought it was such a big mess that we should clear more. So we ended up clearing about 21 acres, mostly because I didn't want to make a mess when we were already there. So we cleared the land. It was fully wooded, second growth first stumps. It had never been cultivated. Piles and piles of rocks. And we burnt the slash piles, made all the debris go away. And in 1999, after 2 years of clearing, we planted our first 6 acres.
Wow. And what's your total acreage now?
The total vineyard planting right now is about 16 acres, and the parcel is still 28.
And that's planted to Pinot Noir, of course, because we're in Oregon. What else do you have planted?
We just have Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, but we have many, many different clones of Pinot Noir and different clones of Chardonnay. Basically, my motto is, if you can take the simple and make it as complicated as possible, that's always fun.
So you've complicated it, and one of that being giving your winery a French name when you're not French. So tell me the story behind the name of your wine and what's your total case production?
Well, let me do the name first. So I wanted a single one-word name, and my last name is Mortimer, and I just couldn't envision anybody buying a bottle of wine named Mortimer. It's just that dog doesn't hunt. I'm sorry. So, and then, in Oregon, a lot of people will name their winery after the road that they're on or something like that. I knew because we were living in Minneapolis at the time, and I was traveling around the country, that we would be more oriented towards being a national brand rather than just selling the wine locally. So I wanted a name that would not be too specific to a particular road or street, that would have a little bit more flexibility from a marketing standpoint. Ultimately, our first winemaker was French. She was very French, and that got us all thinking a lot about French, and we found the word Le Cadeau, which we liked. It translates to the gift. We like to say the wine is not the gift, the wine is the excuse. The gift is actually the land, and especially the friendships, which is what makes the wine business great. That
was a very clean version. You had told me earlier that your wife kind of helped you name it. Is that correct?
Well, that is true. I did scrub it a little bit. Okay, so you want the dirt on the dirt, huh?
Well, it was a funny story. I like that story.
Okay, well, so the dirt on the dirt is that my wife and I were flying back to Minneapolis, where we were living at the time, and we were about to have wine in a bottle, and we needed a label to put on it. And I asked her what we would call it, and she said, "Well, I don't really have a good idea." And I asked her, "How do you feel about the vineyard?" And she said, "Well, it feels like a gift. And a little bit of the backstory is that she's a very relational person, and she likes people. She also likes wine, but she's much bigger on people and relationships. And I said to her, well, why do you feel like it's a gift? And she said, well, I figured when you moved me to a hill in Oregon, I would never see another live human being again the rest of my life. And the gift is that when you're in the wine business, everybody shows up. We actually found early on that we would tell friends in Minneapolis, hey, come see us in Oregon. And we learned, if you own a vineyard, you don't say to anybody, come see me, if you don't want them to show up, because they do. I mean, it's a very high percentage of acceptance.
So what is your total case production? And I believe you have 3 different labels that make up this total.
That's correct. We have Le Cadeau, which is 100% estate fruit. We have a wine brand called Aubuchon, Aubichon, named after Jean Aubuchon, who was a colorful French-Canadian Hudson Bay trapper who was involved in early Oregon politics. So we just kind of borrowed his name. About every year I get 2 or 3 emails from the Aubuchon family up in Maine or Nova Scotia, thinking that there's a long-lost relative in the wine business. And I have to tell them that unfortunately we're not related and there won't be free wine. But the third brand is called Jolete. Jolete, which is Old French. It's the root word for jollity, basically a happy gathering.
And total cases?
Total cases, 3,500 to 4,000. The Jolete products primarily go into distribution and retail, restaurant glass pours, for example. And then the Le Cadeau wines are primarily tasting room mailing list or high-end retail, high-end wine lists. Aubuchon is very similar to Le Cadeau, except the main difference is our fruit sources are not fully owned. So we're getting fruit from friends of ours that have very nice vineyards. It's very high quality fruit. It's just not estate fruit.
And for the wines that are in distribution, what markets are they available in?
Well, it's a pretty long list. I mean, for a small winery, we've collected quite a large number of distributors because my background was wine collecting. And for me, it was always therapy after a hard day at the office to go into a wine store and look at labels and talk to the wine steward about what was good and tasty. And so I like to do that. I like to have our wine out in the marketplace. So we're actually in a lot of high-end restaurants in particular, but we're up and down the East Coast, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, and quite a bit in Colorado. Our wines are popular in the mountains, the ski areas, so Aspen, Telluride, Vail. West Coast, northern, southern California, Oregon, Washington. Midwest, of course, we lived in Minneapolis, so we're there. I grew up in Chicago, so we're there. Let's see, keep on going. Missouri, Ohio, and Michigan. That pretty well covers it.
Wow. Almost all 50 states. Not quite there.
It's more like 20. We do, and then we have a couple of international opportunities. We have a great importer from Sweden that gets into Scandinavia with our wines. We have also sent some wine into Germany with another importer. We have good relationships up in Canada with Ontario, and just recently going into Quebec, which is a nice place to send a wine with a French name.
Absolutely. So tell me, what is one of your first memories relevant to wine?
First memory relevant to wine? Well, I got into wine collecting because I was in the sales and marketing job in the packaging industry, and so I was out with customers, and that meant I had the credit card, which meant that I always got the wine list, and I didn't know anything about wine, and so I started studying and collecting, and the first bad memory about wine was that price and quality don't correlate, age and quality don't correlate, and that's kind of what led me to study wine. I figured if everybody liked it that much, there must be some rhyme or reason to it. So as I began collecting, I think, it's hard to remember the first wow experience, but I know early on I got excited over some Zinfandels back in the early 90s that were pretty special wines. Of course, if you light a match next to them, they explode because they're about 17% alcohol. So you do have no smoking allowed while you're drinking Zinfandel. But the wine was great, and that kind of led me down a path of a little of this and a little of that, and yeah.
So, traveling around the world and all the travels you did, what's one of the best wines you tasted? What region, and maybe one of the worst, since you were fair enough to say there were some bad experiences?
Well, let me start with the worst. That's the bad news. I was on a trip to India, and I decided to try the local wine, and I thought I was going to die. It was really, really not good. I do understand that things have improved since then. This was quite a while ago. In terms of, truly wonderful wines, I'm a huge fan of like Chaves Hermitage. I think probably at home we drink a lot of Loire wines. We love wines from Sancerre, and I like white Burgundies and white Bordeaux. So
speaking about home, if we had the pleasure to walk into your wine cellar, and now we're talking to a wine collector too, so what would we find in your wine cellar?
Well, you would find far fewer collectible wines these days, because what I've discovered is when you're in the wine business, first of all, if you do a pie chart of how much time there is in the day, you got to sleep a little bit. And most wines are not tremendously great for breakfast. So pairing with Raisin Bran's tough, But so, there's a limited number of hours in the day. And when you're in the wine business, you're with people that want to drink your wine. And, you can't be sitting there drinking your wine and say, "Gee, would you mind if I have a glass of Sancerre while you're trying my wine?" That just doesn't play well. So I think that, the reality is that there just isn't that much time left to drink your own cellar. So what you would find is a greatly diminished cellar. You would find it stocked today with wines that are, for the most part, not incredibly notable, but really tasty. Huet from Loire, Chenin Blanc is absolutely wonderful. I'm a huge fan of Weinbach from Alsace. You would find dry Rieslings. You would find a couple bottles of Chaves Hermitage. We just had a wonderful bottle of Cadeau Pinot that a friend gave us as a gift, and those are good friends when they give you, $125 bottles of Cadeau Pinot. Those you want all those kinds of friends that you can get.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't sound like your cellar is too shabby, so it may seem minimal to you. To other people, I think that sounds like a pretty impressive cellar. So, do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
A perfect variety? Maybe on a given day, at a given moment, for a given hour, for 10 minutes, when lightning strikes and everything in the world comes together just right. But I think once that moment's over, you can move on to the next perfect variety. I'm not that channeled to believe that wine only comes in one flavor, and that everything other than that one flavor, whatever it may be, is less perfect. I think there's great examples of all different kinds of varietals.
Fair enough. Traveling the world abroad, who do you think drinks the best in terms of quality?
Drinks the best or makes the best?
Oh, drinks the best.
Drinks the best. Huh. Well, there's just something about Italy that is filled with passion, and I don't know why it is, but it's like Ferraris are either red or black, and if they're black, they've got to have a tan interior. And there's just something stereotypical about Italian design and Italian charm, and I think Italian wines and Italian food probably go right with that. I'll probably get in trouble for saying that if my French consultant from Burgundy ever hears me say that. Although I would tell you that he consults for Angelo Gaia, so I've got a fallback if I get any grief for that. But I'm pretty partial to Italy, and I just think the Italians live really well. They have a great sense of design. They produce wonderful food, and all the ingredients in their wines are pretty special.
So when it comes to deeming wine special, what's your opinion about critics and scores?
Well, I think that they play a necessary role in that for most people, before they get really geeky about wine and figure out what their preferences are, which takes a long time, I think critics play an important role because they help narrow the field down and give visibility to people. And I think other people get stuck in ruts too. You know, they go to the grocery store and they get a bottle of, XYZ Chardonnay, and they just keep going back and buying that because they're afraid to buy something else, And I think critics help expand people's horizon. Helps them experiment, helps them to understand that there's a lot of wine in the world, but helps them to navigate through those wines. As for scores, I guess I would say that I learned very early on that one has to be very careful of scores, in that our first wine was 2002 for Le Cadeau, and we didn't make much of it, so it mostly went to friends and family, and we didn't solicit any press, and there wasn't enough of it around to get press. But in 2003, we made a little more wine, and there were two publications, both notable, that got hold of the 03 wine, and one person gave it a 95-point score. It was number 19 of their top 100. It was, I think, probably their number one Oregon wine that year, which we were pretty excited about because it was impressive. Our second vintage. And another notable critic got hold of it and gave it an 88. So I kind of sat there going, all right, what's wrong with this picture? And I think we've seen the same thing occur over and over again, year after year. And I think it speaks to a variety of issues. Part of it goes back to the question you asked about the perfect varietal. Well, wine is a moving target, and your environment is a moving target. Where you're at, how you're feeling, how you're tasting that day. If you're into biodynamics, there's root days and there's fruit days. And if you're not into biodynamics, there's lightning and sunshine. And, the world changes around you, and the wine is a part of that context. And so it's not surprising that one critic on one day with one bottle of wine might have a less favorable experience than a different critic on a different day with a different bottle of wine, even though it came from the same place. Yeah. So you can understand that. And then you get into the issue that I talk a lot about when I do wine dinners. Usually when we're done, we make a lot of cuveés, all from our estate vineyard, and I'll usually take a show of hands as to what everybody's favorite was. And it's usually fairly equally divided, but one of the points that I ask people is, do you think that we have different reads on aromatics and flavors, which is to say the way that I read a particular flavor or particular aromatic profile from a particular wine is different than the way you read it when you taste the same wine at the same time in the same place? Or do you think it's just a matter of preference? We really read it the same way, but we have different preferences. Or do you think it's both? We not only read the two differently, but we also have different preferences. My personal view is that it's both, which makes it very understandable why one reviewer could give you a 95 and another could give you an 88. Yeah. What that tells the consumer is find a reviewer that you agree with and listen to them. But have enough confidence that if you don't agree with the review, don't assume that they should dictate your palate.
I think that's very well said. When you were a collector, I know you said that you used to spend time in retail stores because that was kind of your post-work therapy. Did you also follow critics at that time, or were you really based on the relationship you built with your retailer?
Oh, yeah, no. Early on, I was one of those horrible people that would, take the magazine into the store, and I'd be looking at the scores and the notes and driving everybody in the store crazy like everybody does when somebody walks in and is reading, a review and wonders why the 99 plus wine isn't on the shelf for $14, and it's very frustrating when you can't get those 99 point wines for $14.
I think that's fantastic because it really says that it shows the evolution of a wine drinker. It's great to start with scores, but even as yourself before you were a winemaker, that you kind of learned to move on and trust opinions. So talking about preferences, red, white, or rosé?
Well, I hate to be coy, but it depends. I would have said some time ago, rosé probably would have been number 3. And I think realistically, it still is probably number 3, but it's a happy number 3. And 10 years ago, it would have been a number 3. And I think part of that probably has to do with the fact that we now make some, which has a way of, getting you to buy in. But and rosés have come a long way in the last 5-10 years. I mean, they used to be, various versions of Pink's Zinfandel. Yeah. And, rosé then and rosé now are 2 different animals. We make a old vine Pinot Gris skin-on rosé where the color comes from the mauve-colored Pinot Gris. And it spends 5 months in neutral oak on the lees. And, most people think of rosés as being a great swimming pool wine or a summer quaffing wine. They're bright and they're fresh and they're thin. Our rosé is probably the perfect Thanksgiving dinner table wine with a turkey that has a mid-palate. I mean, the turkey doesn't have the mid-palate. The wine has the mid-palate. But we make a rosé that has some body to it, and it has layers and flavors. It's a different rosé.
It just says that rosé is far more complex than...
It can be.
Right.
Yeah, it can also be awful.
Right, but it's not a singular style anymore. There's diversity.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that on the spectrum of rosé in the universe, there are a lot more good ones today than historically there used to be. And then, of course, there's the whole world of pink bubbles. I mean, I'm assuming pink bubbles count.
Well, my first question was red, white, or rosé, and your third place somehow got most attention. So now I'm going to say still or sparkling.
Yeah, well, sparkling is kind of on the down there with rosé too, because but again, I mean, we started making it 5 years ago, and of course now I'm liking it much more and paying much more attention. But I think to the original question, if you'd have gone back 10 years ago, it would have been red, no brainer. I think I've evolved in my preferences the way that a lot of winemakers do. Although, actually, a lot of winemakers just trend towards beer. But, I'm not immune from that. But I think in terms of, I've really grown to appreciate white wines. There's just something beguiling about a really good white wine. Mm-hmm. And, of course, reds are right in there, too. But I think the white... To me, a really good white wine, teases more than a red does.
Ooh.
Wine Soundtrack, the voice of American wine growers and makers.
So, for red and white, how do you approach food and wine pairing? Do you take it as a serious matter? Do you follow hard and fast rules? And if so, what kind of rules do you look for as you're pairing a meal?
Do not take it seriously. Do not take it. I do not follow rules. I do want the wine to taste good, which is the primary goal. And, it would be really good if it tasted good with what I'm eating. But I think that, whites have frequently a lot of acid in them, which makes them friendly with food. I remember early on, sometimes it's easier to talk about what doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And I remember having smoked salmon with red wines that just created these horrible, tinny, conflicted flavors that were just pretty awful. And so that's an unrecommended food pairing.
It's a trial by error there.
Trial by error, big error. But, I remember being back in Minneapolis, I remember there was a wicked cold winter night and we were down at this Czechoslovakian restaurant that did handmade sausages, bratwursts and things of that sort. And I remember having, some aged German wines from great producers with those sausages, and they were just really good. And when it was 20 below zero outside, they were even better.
So for somebody who hasn't had the pleasure of tasting your wines, what do you think they're missing out on?
Well, the Le Cadeau wines are unique in that the platform is driven by our vineyard, which is all broken volcanic basalt soil. We're not talking about a few rocks. A lot of the vineyards in Oregon have little or no rock. If you talk to the vineyard manager or the grower, they'll say, oh, we have rocks, and they'll take you over and they'll show you 10 of them for 15 acres. And I'm like, no, those are like pet rocks. We're not talking about those kind of rocks. We're talking about our vineyard looks a little more like a parking lot. And, it just got gravelled. And we have, in the northwest part of the vineyard, you'll find kind of gray, nuggety stone that's all volcanic, but it's about the size of a golf ball. When you get down into the middle, you get into the softballs. And when you get into the southwest corner, you're dealing with footballs and soccer balls and an occasional 55-gallon drum. And so there's a lot of rock. It comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes. It's really hard on the lawnmower, but the thing about it is grapes love rocks. No, it's true. You should see my lawnmower. You're laughing. You think I'm kidding you. I'm not. I go through a lawnmower every year practically. It's crazy.
What possesses you to take a lawnmower over your rocks?
Well, there's like cover crops grow. You got it, because see, now you're probably going to ask me something about like biodynamic farming and input viticulture and all of that. And rocks are not biodynamic input viticulture. You got to have organic stuff there. So, we come in and we plant buckwheat, and you want to, or we plant grass for erosion, and then you got to get it out of there. So you got to go mow. And it's a horrible sounding thing too. I mean, running a lawnmower over rocks is just not good.
I can imagine. It's like a sound at the dentist.
Yeah, back to the wine.
What does someone lose out on by not tasting your wine?
Well, what they lose out on is an Oregon Pinot Noir that has a lot of European character because of our soils. Our wine tends to have a more minerally component to it. We make an assortment of cuveés, but the one from the west side, the rockiest part of the vineyard is called Rochot, which is literally rocks. And, Rochot always starts out with this kind of this red raspberry note, and then it has these Asian spices in the middle, nutmeg and cinnamon, and then it goes stony. And, there aren't a whole lot of Oregon Pinot Noirs that just go stony in the way that, they say German wines taste like slate, and they do, but when was the last time you had a piece of slate, So, I mean, it's hard to say, but these are kind of images of flavors. Right. And when we talk about Le Cadeau, I mean, even if you're in the vineyard on the west side, it has kind of this dusty, minerally scent that's in the air that I noticed when we were developing the vineyard, and that carries through into the wine. So I think what people would be missing are wines that have great structure, great depth, great intensity. They're unique within the Oregon landscape, which isn't to say they're better or worse, but they have a real true personality. And that's really what we're trying to do with our wines, is make wines that have character that ties back to the place where they were grown.
Fantastic. So if space aliens were to land on your property, which of your wines would you present to them?
If who were landing?
Space aliens.
Space aliens were landing on my property. Gosh.
Which of your wines?
Well, depending on what configuration they came in, I think it would, there's, I don't know, I hope I don't get into a branding issue here, but I'm thinking of like a Riedel straw. that probably need to drink. I don't know. So, but apart from that,
I'm not worried about how they drink it. I'm more concerned about which wine you'd give them.
Yeah, I know. I'm just having a problem with the image, though. I'm thinking, I can just see explaining this to my wife. Hey, look, there's some aliens out here. Let's pull a cork. She's like, what are you, out of your mind? But I think that we make a wine called Merci. Merci is made from heritage or heirloom clones of Pinot Noir, and I named it Merci because it's hard to get these clones, and they have a long history that is exciting and compelling. And I called it Merci because there were a whole lot of people involved in getting the clones originally and preserving them and getting viruses out of them. And then there were people that helped me get them and educated me about them. And so what better way than to say thank you than naming your cuvée Merci. But so we did that. And Merci is a really nice wine that's kind of a friendly, it goes well with the gift. We've got a gift called Merci. And I think if aliens showed up, if they weren't too ugly and nasty, I'd probably give them a bottle of Merci.
Fantastic. So your home is in the center of the vineyard, correct?
We do have a home in the center of the vineyard. We don't live there all the time, but we do have a home there, yes.
So in the vineyard, just it being part of where you are, you've planted it, you've lived with it. In the years that you've been here, how much variation do you see vintage to vintage? Is it something that plays a huge role? I know there's vintage variation, but in your vineyard, is it something that is significant, or do you see more commonality?
Well, I don't think it's really a vineyard-specific question. It's an Oregon question, and I've always said to people, if you don't like the vintage, just wait a year and you'll get a whole new wine. It's not always the case. We've been on this incredible streak since 2014. 15 was a little on the hot side, but I think we've gotten better as an industry, and certainly Le Cadeau, us as a producer, has gotten much better at dealing with warm vintages. When we got hit with 2003, I think it took us and everybody else caught us off guard, and then we got hit again in 06, and we were a little bit more ready for it, and we got hit again in 09. There's a pattern here, 3, 6, 9, but then it jumped to 15 before it was really hot again. But it was a good vintage, and you can go back 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and, so far so good for 19, although we're not done yet. But I think all of those vintages have been quite consistent and quite good. But then you go back and, you compare it to vintages like 07 and 11, which were critically panned, and they were very different than the recent string of vintages. But the reality is if you say to winemakers, what wines do you drink? What really excites you? Most winemakers in Oregon will say, I'm drinking my 11s, and if they've got any 07s, they'll say, I had an 07, especially like from a Magnum. We had an 07 from Magnum not too long ago, and they're fantastic. So sometimes the ones that start out kind of tough continue on and grow up to be really, really great wines. So,
you said at the beginning that when you first bought the property, you bought it as something that could be grape friendly, but you didn't have the intention, but that the land spoke to you and told you that they wanted to be planted with vines. So now, today, do you go into the vineyards? Do the vines still talk to you? Do you talk to the vines?
Oh, yeah. Well, we kind of yell at each other. It's like a good marriage. But, they talk differently. As I've matured and gotten a lot more knowledgeable about viticulture and farming and making wine, I had a long business career in a different business, and I always used to say it's the little stuff that kills you. And when you first start out anything, all you see is the big stuff. It's like, hey, that vine's dead. Well, yeah, you can't not notice that. Now you see whether they're happy or whether they're not quite as happy. You see lots of little things that ultimately go into making a great wine, and it's the details that come out. So our conversations these days with each other tend to be a lot more detailed. They're kind of like, hey, can I have a little drink? Yeah, well, just a little one, or you're looking at things like cover crops, and in particular, maybe paying attention to vigor or the lack of vigor. The rate at which stems lignify. We had our French consultant in town, and we've had a couple of warm days, and in the rockiest part of the vineyard, he was observing that we had lignified stems happening very early, basically the shoots turning brown. And he called it emergency ripening, which I thought was an interesting term. And he said, you kind of want to avoid that. And I said, well, yeah, but we're growing on rocks, and it tends to put us into a deficit irrigation situation quickly, which is one of the benefits of it, which means we can control the water as opposed to being left with just what's in the ground. And in Oregon, that's important. And so, I don't see it as all bad. Mm-hmm.
Are there any signs that you look for, are there any traditions that you have at the start of harvest?
Traditions at the start of harvest. Well, One of the things that I've learned over the years, which is I'm sure you're not going to hear probably from anybody else, is that because we have all these different sections in the vineyard that we keep separate and we make individual cuveés from, every bin of fruit that we pick needs to be very carefully labeled and tagged, and so the right fruit goes into the right cuvée. So, for example, I mentioned Rochot from the west side. We have Proudest from the east side, and Diversité, which is a broad mix of clones. And what I've learned over the years is that when the picking crews come in, they're all like racehorses. They want to get in there and pick. And so the first thing you want to do is make sure they're picking in the right spot. But I've also learned that the best way to make sure that they're picking in the right spot is to make sure that you've pre-written all of the tags for the picking bins, because if you have to go back to the house to write the tags, by the time you come back, they will be picking in the wrong spot. So
So your tradition is to write tags.
My tradition is to be my tradition is to get out ahead of a disaster.
So there's no opening champagne over a bottle or having a big dinner. It's write your tags on time.
We do the big dinner after we pick the fruit, not before. The last thing I want to do is be sleeping through harvest. So
fair enough.
We do have celebrations along the way, but job number one is to do what we're here to do, which is make great wine. And the best way to do that is be prepared, be on it, and be out ahead of a problem.
Fair enough. So when you were a little boy, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, it clearly wasn't winemaking. I don't think that got on my radar until, I was more like 40-ish. But I think, what did I want to be when I grew up? I wanted to be employed. My goals were not terribly specific. I just wanted them to be good and functional.
So you're originally from Minnesota. I know that there's some good team pride over there. Do you have a loyal sports following?
So let me correct. I might have misled you.
Sorry.
We lived in Minnesota for a long time, but
I already crossed the line.
The beauty of my situation is that I actually grew up in Chicago, and my wife's from Philadelphia. And so when it comes to sports, we just tried to pick a team that's from one of the cities where we have a presence that's winning. I know that's a fair weather deal, but it works really well. I mean, it's just, usually somewhere between, Minneapolis, Chicago, Philadelphia, or anywhere else that we've lived. Out here, it's, we're kind of into the Ducks, and that, I don't know, the Ducks don't work universally, but that's what makes Oregon go around.
Okay, well, I'm going to save you by not picking one of your teams that you've bet on having a good chance of winning. If the Ducks were to ever win their championship, what wine would you present to them?
Oh, wow. There's a side of me that wants to think of something, like right down the road is the winery Duck Pond, and it would seem like that would be the appropriate wine. But I'm not sure. Maybe they'd like a bottle of our new Chardonnay. I don't know why I would give that to them, but they might. If they were to win, I'd give them a sparkling wine so they could spray it all over the locker room.
Absolutely.
There we go. How stupid of me. Yes, sparkling wine. Clearly the sparkling wine. Forget about the Duck Pond.
And your sparkling wine is 100% Pinot Noir?
It is. It is all estate grown. We make a Blanc de Noir from 2011 that we're almost sold out of. It was beautiful wine. No dosage, grower's style. Entourage for over 4 years. And then we have a rosé from 2013. And we have 2017 perking away in storage at the moment.
Well, they're not going to win anytime soon, so by the time they win, maybe that'll be in bottle.
Well, they could win soon. Some of the Oregon teams are pretty good.
When you're not working, how do you spend your free time?
Working.
It's a fair answer in the wine business.
It is. Well, first of all, it's a lot of fun. So there's real work in wine. I mean, the parts about wine that nobody ever tells you about because they generally would like to forget about them are compliance and bottling. Compliance is awful, and you don't even need to have a vivid imagination to consider 50 states, all with different tax laws and everybody having their hands out and all. And not, it's not only limited, I mean, they go farther than that. It's like, oh, you want to ship directly to a consumer? You need this license. You want to distribute? You need another license. So, and you end up like paying tax bills for 87 cents because you sold 4 bottles of wine to somebody. So the compliance part of the wine business is absolutely crazy. Bottling is a train wreck in the making because everything has to come together at the same time. You're going to pay a bottling truck $3,000 to be there for a day. And the glass has to be there, the corks have to be there, you have to put the right wine in the right bottle, it's got to be filtered right, you don't want the wine to be, to clog the filter on the bottling truck. The bottling truck's got to work. Bottling trucks are like cuckoo clocks. I mean, they're just all these moving pieces. When you're all done, the bird flies out of the side of the truck, goes cuckoo, and you're done. I mean, they're crazy.
No wonder you have no free time.
I don't know why bottling trucks even work, I mean, I spent most of my career in packaging, and my first job assignment was to go out and look at packaging for lasagna that wasn't working right, and it was on a high-speed packaging machine, and the trays of lasagna went up over the carton and landed on the floor, and there was a 4-foot-high pile of lasagna on the floor, and that's kind of the way bottling trucks are. If they don't work, it's a huge mess. So I've talked about the things that I don't really care about, compliance and bottling. Nobody will tell you about those parts, okay? But it all has to come together. But here's the good part about it. Uh-huh. You get to do stuff like this. Uh-huh. You get to talk knowingly about things we know nothing about, and you get to eat and drink. And I mean, a tough day at the restaurant is I go out and I talk to 50 people who love our wine, and we have an incredibly great dinner. We have a great relationship with, for example, Domaine Hudson in Wilmington, Delaware, and I've been going out there for 10 years, and we do wine dinners there once or twice a year, and a lot of the same people come back, and it's great fun. And so, the artistry of making wine is incredible. The vineyard and Mother Nature throw curveballs at you all the time, and so it always changes. The tax forms are usually the same, but the vineyard and all of that stuff is different. And so that's real creative, and the other thing is you never make the perfect wine. And, and that's why we're always trying to find what's missing, and I think chasing the perfect wine is something that you can do for a lifetime.
So on an evening that you might be planning with your wife, a romantic evening, what are the wines that you're going to pull out to enjoy?
Well, it would definitely be a white wine. And I think that, it would be probably maybe a white Bordeaux or a really nice Chenin Blanc from Loire. Mm-hmm.
Very cool. And I like how you say white Bordeaux as opposed to, since you make Pinot, you didn't naturally go to white Burgundy.
No, well, the reason being is that, I mean, my wife loves Chablis and bright, fresh wines, but I think probably her favorite would be, I would go with a truly top-tier white Bordeaux that maybe has a little bit of age on it. Those are pretty special wines.
Yeah, very special. So what is the best piece of advice that you've ever received, or what is a piece of advice that you carry with you in your life, and who gave it to you?
Probably my dad, who said, don't burn bridges. And I think that's something that we could and should all work hard to do, because you never know when you need a friend.
Absolutely. Looking back at the work that you've done in the wine industry, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date?
Well, I think that having an assortment of wines that generally people think are really good. Obviously, people have different preferences, and not everybody thinks you make the best wine. And then, there is this thing in wine that, if you went out and you paid $1,000 for the bottle, no matter what, you're going to think it's good. And I think, frankly, we had a really gratifying experience the other day where we had a meeting with a notable wine critic. And I could tell at the beginning of the conversation that the person had been doing this a lot, and that they were listening, but they weren't really excited. And that's probably because I was talking. But when I got quiet and we poured the wines, I mean, the person was visibly excited about the wines because of the different cuveés from the different... I mean, Rochot is 700 feet from Proudest. And Merci is down at the bottom with the heirloom clones, and Diversité is up at the top. But it's a relatively small vineyard, and yet, while all of our wines have a common Le Cadeau sort of a signature, they all express themselves differently. And I could visibly see that this person was really excited over the idea that this one piece of dirt could turn out 4 wines, each of which had a really great personality to them that was reflective of the clones and the soils and the aspect of where they were grown. And for me, it really validates a lot of what we work so hard to do. You know, when you're with a person that spends 7 days a week for the most part either thinking or drinking or talking about or writing about wine, and they can get excited still. Mm-hmm. That's meaningful. It's not, it's like the old Navy slogan. It's not just a job, it's an adventure. But if you can say that about something after you've been doing it for 25 years, that's a big deal. And that made me feel really good.
That's a lovely sentiment. So now I'm going to rattle off a few quick questions, quick answer ones.
Quick answer.
Finish the sentence. A table without wine is like?
It's like a table without wine. It's like a table with water. It's a table in a state that doesn't permit alcohol.
If there was one person from any walk of life, living or deceased, that you could have drinking your wine, who might that be?
Wow. I'd probably change this, but I've seen some incredibly funny outtakes of Orson Welles doing "We Will Sell No Wine Before It's Time" commercials, where he was absolutely pickled and darn near fell out of his chair. I think it's not behavior that I necessarily support or condone, but they're awfully funny, and I do think it would be fun to sit down with Orson Welles and share a bottle of wine and have him, play Paul Masson and talk about selling no wine before it's time to the point where he can't even talk.
I love it. Never have I heard that one. Okay.
Have you seen the clips?
No, I'll have to go back. They predate my time a little.
Well, you need to go see them. Carl's seen them.
So, name 3 wines you would take with you to a deserted island.
Oh, wow. That's actually one of my questions. I often ask people, I don't ask it quite that way, and I don't mean to change your question for you, but the question is, if you were on an island and it happened to have a 55-degree cave, and there was all kinds of things to eat, not just seafood, but you had, wild boar and all kinds of good
This
things.
is implied. It's your island. So it's the perfect island. It's got all
well, the other part of the island is FedEx flies over, and they will drop from a parachute whatever you want. But my question's a little different. If you could have just 10 producers, and you get the entire line. So do you want, a producer that makes one really good wine, or do you want a producer that makes a whole bunch? You can have it either way. But that's my question, not your question.
Well, I mean, if you really, instead of picking just 3 wines, if you want to pick 3 producers.
3 producers, wow. Well, I would probably have...
He likes 10 more. You want to give me 10, don't you?
No, I would maybe, I would probably take Gauguin. I would probably take Dujac. Gosh, I only get 3. I don't know. Probably I'd have to go to Italy. I might go with Gaia. I love the tannin structure in Gaia.
I'm being very nice to you because by giving you 3 producers, you got their whole portfolios. Most people have to pick 3 wines.
3 wines.
So.
Yeah, well, if I picked 3 producers, I'm sorry. I won. So there, it's my island.
That's right. That's right. Okay, one more game.
Okay.
I want you to pair the wines with music. Some of the wines we talked about today. So let's start with the wine that we are sipping in our glass, the 2016 Reserve Trajet Pinot Noir.
Okay.
What does it make you think of? What do you want to listen to?
Well, Trajet is a real spicy wine, and it's 100% whole cluster. So I think the music should have some staccato or rhythm to it. It's probably not, classical violins. I think it's probably a little more exciting. It's interesting. It's an interesting question because when we make the wines, there's music on in the wine cellar, and actually Jim Sanders, who makes a good number of our wines, is a music hound of sorts, and to me, the wine and the music really have to go well together. And I'm always upset when he's abusing our wine with crappy music.
Aww.
And so I like to have good music on. But Treget, I would. I don't know what I'd play with Treget. I'm thinking. I don't know. It might like an old Joni Mitchell song.
Okay. What about your rosé? Because you were saying that, you've gained an appreciation for rosé. So I'd like to know how you would pair that.
Well, I mentioned, I think I mentioned possibly earlier that our rosé would go well with a Thanksgiving dinner because it has a mid-palate and it has kind of a smoother texture that glides. So I could see the rosé going with some kind of classical music, actually, believe it or not.
And your sparkling wine, your Blanc de Noir?
Well, I mean, of course, it's got bubbles and you're celebrating. So I would think, something that kind of rocks, really. It doesn't seem quite intuitive, but I think of bubbles as partying.
Party music.
Party music.
Party house music. Yeah. Absolutely. So what's one winemaking region in the world that's at the top of your list to go visit?
Well, I don't know that it's at the top of my list, but I would like to go to Hungary. Winemaking goes back there so long, and I think because of the Iron Curtain, it kind of got sequestered, and it's not a place that's thought of too much. But there's a grape called Ferment that is a lot like Chenin Blanc, and I happen to like Chenin Blanc, and I like Ferment. And I think it would be fun to do a deep dive on Ferment in Hungary and just see all the different kinds of ferment that are up.
That sounds like a fun place to go. I might tag along on that trip. Thank you so much for joining us today, Tom. It's been so much fun listening to you and your answers. Before we go, can you just remind our listeners about where they can visit you and where they can find your wines?
Absolutely. Our tasting room is in Dundee, Oregon, right on Highway 99 in the Red Hills Inn building. We also will do vineyard tours by appointment, so you can give us a call. Our website is cadeauvineyard.com, and we would love to see you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much.
Have a good afternoon. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.